Hey, how's it going? It's Grant with the Garden of Eater, and in this video we're gonna do a simple Caridina shrimp setup. So this is just the basics. This is everything you're gonna need to be able to breed and keep Caridina shrimp successfully. Alright, to start off we're gonna use a 10-gallon tank. I strongly recommend using at least 10-gallon tanks. The bigger the better. However, you can have success with smaller tanks. It's just a lot harder to keep those parameters consistent and stable. So for that, we recommend at least 10-gallon tank to start out with. And then we've got an LED light. It's just a cheap LED. We use Aquaneats or Beamworks, really anything. Just look for a full spectrum LED light that fits your budget. So now we're just gonna clean the tank and take off the sticker before we add the substrate. Alright, so I just peeled off the sticker and I just rinsed out the tank really quickly with some RO water just to get the dust off from it sitting on the shelf at Petco. By the way, right now Petco's having their $1 per gallon sale, so I picked up this tank for just over $11 with tax. So now we're going to add the substrate. We're going to use Florin Volcanic Rio Oscuro Fine from Brightwell Aquatics. This is by far the best soil that we've ever used. It's lasted us almost 4 years in some tanks and well over 3 in others. And it just has a very strong buffering capability, does not leach a lot of ammonia, and overall it's great for plants and shrimp. So this is our go-to substrate for when we set up Caridina tanks. We use the fine or smaller, the 3mm to 1mm size. This is because the babies tend to get stuck or trapped in the larger substrates. So you can use like 5mm for the bottom and then top it off with the fine. That would be a-okay. And then we're gonna go ahead and add about 1.5 to 2 inches. This is a 25-pound bag, so we're gonna use about 1/3 of the bag for this tank. Now when you buy substrate, you want to make sure that the bag isn't completely dried and turned to dust. In this bag, you still see some moisture built up on the sides. That is a key to look for when you're buying new substrate. That means it's nice and fresh. If it's dried, it's going to break down a lot faster and turn to dust on you. So make sure it's nice and moist before you purchase it at the store, or when you get it out online or something like that. Just double check to make sure it's nice and fresh before you use it. I gotta get the water going right away. We can't let that substrate dry out at all. And then I immediately took the bag that we had opened and didn't use the rest of it and took a rubber band to make sure that was sealed off nice and fresh, so that way when we do the 48-gallon rinless tank and make that nice and planted, that substrate's nice and fresh for that tank as well. Alright, so we got 2 inches of substrate and we've got to get the water going already. So we got the RO water that we already pre-mixed the night before because we're doing water changes in the hallway today. So we got the water already set to 150 TDS with 5 GH. Now if you didn't have your water already pre-mixed and you just wanted to fill it up with RO water, you could do 10 pumps for the 10-gallon for 5 GH. Each pump's going to give you about 15 TDS for the tank. So the most important thing is though that we are going to have 0 KH with this mineral. We've got the GH Plus from Brightwell. This won't add any KH to your water. It'll only raise the GH and TDS, and that's what you want because any KH in the water is going to fight against the buffering capability of the soil, and it's just going to cause neutral water. So you want to have that acidic water for the Caridina to be able to breed and molt and do everything that you want them to do successfully. Now we're going to add the bacteria to the tank. We use this Florin Bacter 1. It's a starter bacteria from Brightwell Aquatics. We're going to add 1 pump for every gallon, so 10 pumps. Always make sure you shake very well whenever using products. And then 1 for good luck. Now that the bacteria is in, we're going to add some fertilizer. This is just simply going to feed the bacteria to help give it an extra jump start to get it colonized and thriving in the tank. 2 pumps. So I've got the filter plugged in. It's really quiet, a lot quieter than the hang on the back filters. And then the bubbles themselves are quite quiet as well. And now we're just gonna let the tank fill up. As the tank fills up, some things to talk about is usually when I add water into the tank, there's shrimp or something in the tank, so I tend to match the water temperatures and everything down to a T that go into the tank. Now there's no shrimp in here, so I'm not too worried about the water temperature or any parameters, so I could fill up the tank really as fast as I want to without stirring up the substrate and creating a mess. So that's not really to worry about. However, when I do water changes for my other tanks, I have 72 temperature for the tanks. I like to keep my house at 72, so this allows me to have the water going into the tanks. If I leave it overnight, it matches the same temperature as the water in the tanks. And then another thing I like to do is mix the minerals the night before. This allows all the minerals to fully dissolve in the water before adding them to the tank. Again, you don't really have to do that when adding to a new tank because there's no shrimp or anything in there, so you could always check the parameters the next day, add a little RO water or minerals depending on where your levels are at. And then another thing I like to do is add a little piece of wood to the tank. This helps give an extra little boost of biofilm in the tank for the shrimp to graze on. And this piece of wood already has some moss attached to it, so I'm not going to add any extra. However, if it didn't have the moss on it, I would add that as well. Now, I like to keep it minimalistic. I don't like to do a ton of plants or anything like that. I do not like to mess up the substrate at all. It seems like anytime you mess with the substrate with your shrimp, something happens. You create a bacterial infection in the tank, and that's not good. You lose like one shrimp every couple of days or so. And then you got to add botanicals and black water extract to try and counteract that. So try to avoid that as much as possible. So I just don't add any rooted plants in my main Caridina breeding tanks. And then besides that, this is a very, very simple tank. No heater, no mineral balls, no special shrimp caves or anything like that. No leaf litter. Don't need any of that, so I'm not going to throw that in there. The only thing that this tank is going to see from now on will be a colony of shrimp, some fresh water with water changes, and shrimp food. Other than that, we don't add anything else to our shrimp tanks. We just keep it very, very easy. But now that the water is topped off all the way to the top, we're going to add a lid. These lids are the double polycarbonated panels that we made video. We'll put a link to that in the description down below if you want to see those. Very nice, sturdy lids that don't bend or warp, and they're fairly cheap. You want to make sure you have a lid on the tank to prevent any TDS spikes or anything like that. The water evaporates. As the water evaporates, the minerals are left behind, and this causes your general hardness and your total dissolved solids to go up, and your KH as well in your Neocaridina tanks. So your KH should be 0 here, so that won't be affected. However, keeping a lid will keep anything from ending up in the tank that shouldn't be or anything like that. And from here on out, we're just going to run the tank for 2 weeks. I'm going to do probably 30 to 40% water change, where I'm going to add more florin bacter 1 as well as florin multi. And we'll let it run for another 2 weeks after that, and it's ready for shrimp. So I like to keep it very minimalistic. Some breeders like to make their tanks heavily densed in algae and everything like that, and I just don't see any purpose to that. I have some tanks do that on their own. I tried doing it on purpose to some tanks, and the tanks where I did minimalistic, nothing to it, did just as good, if not better, on average per tank for the breeding and everything like that. So this is how we set up all of our tanks. This is how we set up all of our tanks in Layla's room in the rack build. Only thing is we didn't have a wood for all the tanks, so we got a little fancy, but it's not needed. So little moss, substrate, filter, RO water with GH minerals, And that's really all you need to be successful in breeding Caridina shrimp. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for future content.